We'll start then by finding the domain of the rational expressions. More specifically, we care about the domain restrictions. And we did talk about domain restrictions earlier in this unit. What is the one bad number we're not allowed to have in fractions? 0. And where is it not allowed to be? In the denominator, right? So if I want to find the domain restrictions, I want to set the denominator equal to 0, right? That's how I find the domain restrictions. So this equation here is a rational equation because it's an equation with fractions, right? That's what rational equation means. So first we're going to start by finding the domain restrictions. So what's one factor that you see in the denominator? What's one factor? There's not an x by itself. It's always with something else. X plus 6 is 1 and x minus 2 is 1. So we're going to take x plus 6 and set it equal to 0. And x minus 2 and set it equal to 0. We'll solve each of those equations. Here we'll subtract 6 from both sides and we get x equals negative 6. And here we'll add 2 to both sides and we get x equals 2. This is how we find the domain restriction. So for example, 2 is a domain restriction because if I plug in a 2 here for x, I'm going to get 1 over 0, right? And if I try to type that into my calculator, it's not even going to like it, right? Because you can't divide by 0. If I plug a negative 6 in here, I'll get 3 over 0, and I can't divide by 0, right? So these are not allowed to be solutions to this equation. They'll both also make this one 0 since they're both in there, okay? So our domain restrictions are that x cannot be 2 and x cannot be negative 6. And the reason why we're checking this is because at the end of the problem, let's say you solve it and you get x equals negative 6 as a solution. Is that actually a possible solution? No, you would have to then cross it off, right? So if we check the domain restrictions first, then we can check them against our answers at the end to see if those are actually solutions, okay? The rest of this is going to be exactly review as to what we did on Friday. So we're going to solve these problems using the LCD. So first, write down what you think the LCD is here. Look at your fractions, look at your denominators, write down the LCD. So our LCD should be x plus 6 and x minus 2. And once we find the LCD, what do we do with it? Anyone remember? What we do with that LCD? Yeah, we multiply everything over here by that LCD, right? So let's multiply everything over here by that LCD. And then you use those to cancel out your denominators. So the first one, x plus 6 will cancel. Second one, x minus 2 will cancel. Third one, everything cancels. And then we write down what we have left. This is the step that a lot of people have been skipping lately, and I highly recommend not skipping this step. So write down what we have left. So here, what do we have left? X minus 2 and 3. So we need to do 3 times x minus 2. You could put the 3 at the end if you want, but it means the same thing, and I think you guys like it better at the beginning. We got a plus sign. And then in the middle here, what do we have left? 1 and x plus 6, so 1 times x plus 6. And then over here, what's the only thing we have left? 4. So now we can distribute, combine like terms, and solve, right? So go ahead and finish this. Distribute, combine like terms, and solve. Alrighty, so you should have gotten 3x minus 6 plus 1x plus 6 equals 4. We can combine 3x and 1x. Those make 4x. Minus 6 plus 6 is 0, so that just disappears. Divide by 4, and you should have gotten x equals 1. Now you do want to check that with your domain restrictions. Does that cause any conflict with our domain restrictions, x equals 1? No, so that one's okay. It's a solution. So our solution is x equals 1. So like I said, most of this is kind of the same as what we did on Friday. The domain restrictions are the only new thing. These last two problems, though, are a little bit trickier to solve. We had one like it last week, but some people attempted it, some people didn't, and it was a little confusing. So we're going to just do 2 more together that are of that more confusing kind, okay? So first, I want you to start with the domain restrictions and the LCD. But before we get started, we got to do something with this. When you see x squared and x and a number with a little 1 in front, what does that your brain already start thinking or should start thinking it should be doing? With something that looks like that. Just this part down here. What times 8? What times what equals 8 and adds together to get 6, right? We need to factor that. So we need to factor this. Look for 2 numbers that multiply together to get 8 and add together to get 6. So go ahead and factor that. What are those numbers? 2 and 4. So this will factor into x plus 2, x plus 4, which is nice because there's already an x plus 2 and already an x plus 4 in the other denominators, right? So that's kind of nice. Now go ahead and find your domain restrictions. So do that on your own. Find your domain restrictions and your LCD. So for my domain restrictions, we should set x plus 4 equal to 0, solve that, and we get x equals negative 4. X plus 2 equal to 0, and we solve that, and we get x equals negative 2. So we have two domain restrictions. X cannot be negative 4, and x cannot be negative 2. And then our LCD should be x plus 4 times x plus 2. Go ahead and now use your LCD to multiply and write down what you have left. Once you get to the equation part, I'll help you through that. We'll solve that equation together. That's the tricky part about this problem. So when you're done canceling out, here x plus 4 should cancel. That's going to leave you with an x and an x plus 2. In the middle, the x plus 2 should cancel, leaving you with 2 times x plus 4. And on the right side, everything cancels, just leaving you with 10x plus 24. So make sure you got here. When I distribute x times x plus 2, what do I get? X squared plus 2x. This is why this one gets a little funky. Then we get 2x plus 8, because x times x is x squared, right? Not 2x. X plus x is 2x. X times x is x squared. There's already something you still know how to do at this point. What do you know how to do over here? What are you going to do over here automatically without even thinking about it? Add 2x and 2x, right? Those combined, those are like terms. So that'll be x squared plus 4x plus 8. And then this is where you might have gotten a little tripped up. Or maybe you do remember what we did last week. There was one kind of like this, but we didn't pay too close attention to it. When you have an x squared and an x in your equation, it's going to be hard to just solve for x, right? We're not going to be able to just get x by itself. So you're probably going to end up factoring at some point. Especially when you see this, you kind of think factor, right? But you want to make sure that before you start factoring, that one side of the equation equals 0. Okay? So right now, this over here does not equal 0. So I don't want to factor this yet. Okay? But can I make this equal 0 over here? Yeah, just by moving these guys over to the other side, right? So that's what we're going to do first. Let's move the 10x, so we'll subtract 10x from both sides. And let's move the 24, so we'll subtract 24 from both sides. That'll leave us with a 0 on the right. So we'll have x squared, 4 minus 10 is negative 6x, 8 minus 24 is negative 16. And now that this equals 0, you're going to want to factor this. Okay, now that that equals 0, you're going to want to factor that. So look for two numbers, then multiply together to get negative 16, and add together to get negative 6, and go ahead and factor that. So I'll give you a minute to think about that. So this will be -8 and +2 will be your numbers. So this should factor into x minus 8 and x plus 2. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone remember what I do from here to finish solving? Yeah, you say each of those factors equal to 0 because the whole equation is equal to 0, right? So now we want to say, okay, well, if x minus 8 is equal to 0 or x plus 2 equals 0, those will both be answers. So this add 8 and you get x equals 8 minus 2 and you get x equals -2. So those are both solutions, but go back and check with your domain restrictions. So are both of those actually solutions? Yeah, which one do we have to say, nope, not a solution? -2, because our domain restriction said that x cannot be -2, right? So we're going to cross that one off. And our only solution is going to be x equals 8. So that's the point of the domain restrictions. Any questions about that one? All right, we're going to do one more kind of together because it's another tricky one like this, but I'm going to have you do most of the work. I'm just going to have you check yourself as you go so you don't go down the wrong path. So first start with the domain restrictions and the LCD for number 3. Start with the domain restrictions and the LCD for number 3. Same thing you did with the other one. So start by, what did you start by? You took x minus 3 and you did what with it? Yeah, what did you do with this x minus 3? Add 3. Before that even. What was the very first thing you wrote down? Before you added 3. What did you do right here? So you did the same thing for these. What do you set it equal to? X minus 6. So just write x equals 0. Oh. Right? Just set it equal to 0. And now it's solved. So no work. All right, compare your domain restrictions and your LCD with your table. Compare what you got for your domain restriction and your LCD with your table. There's easy mistakes here, so I want you to make sure you catch your mistakes before you move on. Compare what you got for the domain restriction and your LCD with your table. All right, so a lot of people took x minus 3 and set it equal to 0 and got one domain restriction, x equals 3, so x cannot be 3. But there's another one, right? X equals 0 because there's another denominator. X is by itself, right? So we got to set that equal to 0. Well, then it's solved, right? There isn't any solving to do. So x also cannot be 0. When you look at your LCD, remember it has to be x and x minus 3. Because this x and this minus 3, these are not common x's, right? You can't separate the x and the minus 3. That's all one factor, okay? So your LCD needs to be x and x minus 3. So go ahead and now try to do the next part on your own. Multiply everything by your LCD and get an equation. If you want to try to solve the equation, go for it. But I'll walk you through that once you get there. This is what you should get after you've done your multiplying and your crossing out. Here you should be left with a 2 and an x, so 2x. Here you should be left with a 1 and an x minus 3, so 1 times x minus 3. And here the x minus 3's cancel, so you should be left with x times x minus 1. So make sure you have that. And then when we distribute, we'll get 1x minus 3 and x squared minus x. And then on the left here, we can definitely combine some like terms. So we should have 3x minus 3 is equal to x squared minus x. This is where it gets a little bit tricky because you've got an x squared and an x. So eventually you're going to have to factor, but you need everything to be on one side and 0 on the other side. I always recommend moving stuff where the x squared is already, right? Move it to that side. So make this side equal 0 over here. Move everything over to this side and make this side 0. So go ahead and do that. So you should end up with x squared minus 4x plus 3, and then you should factor from there and find your solutions. Go ahead and finish that on your own. Make sure to check your answers with your domain restriction once you get there. So you should have gotten x minus 3, x minus 1, because negative 1 times negative 3 will be positive 3, but add together to be negative 4. Then you set each of those equal to 0, and you'll get x equals 3 and x equals 1 as your final answers. But are both of those really our final answers? No, which one do we have to take out? X equals 3, so because there's a domain restriction that x cannot be 3. So x equals 1 is our only solution. It's also possible to get no solution as an answer. If you only have one answer and that's in your domain restrictions, then there's no solution, okay? Any questions about number 3?